Okay, Mr. Chairman, looks like we have a quorum, and we'll go ahead and start with the introduction. Good evening and welcome to the Boise City Design Review Committee meeting. A few things to start out with for tonight's proceedings. Everyone from the public entering the hearing via Zoom has been automatically muted and cannot speak. As the item you're interested in comes up for discussion, you will be called upon and unmuted. If you need to share your screen, you will be promoted to panelist and will rejoin the meeting after a slight delay. There is a chat function in Zoom. This is not part of the record and should only be used if technical difficulties arise. If the chat function isn't available for you, you can email zoninginfo@cityofboise.org with any technical issues. Our procedures for public hearings begin with a presentation from the planning team. Then we'll go to the applicant and then the representative of the Registered Neighborhood Association, if present, followed by questions from the committee. After that, we proceed to public testimony, starting with those who signed up on the online sign-up sheet in advance, and then anyone else who raises their hand virtually. Anyone from the public present in person will be asked to raise their hand and approach the dais. If you are attending through your telephone, you can type *9 to raise your hand. Each member of the public is allowed up to 3 minutes for testimony. And finally, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for rebuttal, after which the hearing will be closed and the commission will deliberate and render a decision. And with that, Mr. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening. I would like to call the October 13th, 2021 Design Review meeting to order. Victoria, will you please call the roll?
Zabala,
Here.
Zuckerman,
Here.
Rudine,
Here.
Ersted,
Here.
4 present, 3 absent.
At this time, I would take a motion on the September 8th, 2021 minutes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would move to approve the hearing minutes of September 8th, 2021 as provided by staff.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Victoria, will you please call the roll?
Zabala,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Ersted,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
This evening, as we'll go down through the agenda, there are 2 items up for deferral. DRH 21-00238. It will be deferred to the November 10th hearing. Is there any member of the audience wishing to speak in this item who cannot make this date? Seeing none. The second item up for deferral is DRH 21-00376, item 5 on the agenda. It will also be deferred to the November 10th hearing date. Is there any member of the audience wishing to speak on this item who cannot make this date? Seeing none, I would take a motion on the deferrals. Mr. Chairman? Member? Yes.
I move to defer the aforementioned items to the following design review committee meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Victoria, call the roll.
Zabala,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Ersted,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
The first item we are considering tonight for the consent agenda is item DRH 21-00368, item number 2. Construct a new 8-story hotel with ground floor lobby and restaurant space and associated site improvements on property in a C5DD zone. Is the applicant present? Please show that the applicant is present. Are you in agreement with the recommended conditions and approval? Let the record show that they are in agreement. Are there any members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item? Seeing none, this item will be moved to the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
is it appropriate for me to request that we move it off the consent agenda?
Absolutely.
Okay, I would like to request that we move it off the consent agenda.
Okay, we will take it off the consent agenda since we have not voted on it and put it as an item to be heard. So that is all that was being considered for the consent agenda. Unless I missed something? No, that's correct.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
the following item was also proposed for the consent agenda.
Oh, it was noted to me before the meeting started that it was being taken off the consent. agenda.
Okay,
It's being
thank you.
considered
Sorry
for
about
that.
that.
Okay. The first item to be heard tonight is item number 2, DRH 21-00368. Construct a new 8-story hotel with ground floor lobby and restaurant space and associated site improvements and property in a C5DD. I'll turn it over to staff for their report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. The subject property is located in the downtown core at the northwest corner of West Grove Street and South 11th Street. We do have a historic Owyhee building on the same parcel, and they are not proposing any changes to that building. And then the subject site is the southeast portion of that parcel, which you can see in the red box. And then that portion of parking to the west will be retained. And here we have the first floor plan and kind of the layout of the building. We have an entry at the corner, and then they have circulation along the north and west there. And then a large lobby and restaurant space and bar on the first floor. And then from the elevations, you can see that they've used a variety of materials, including some traditional and then more contemporary details that kind of tie into the surrounding buildings. And the applicant is in agreement with all the conditions of approval. So we can, and they're present as well. So I believe they can give a presentation if you would like.
Say that again, please.
The applicant is present if
Oh.
you would like the applicant to present.
Yeah, absolutely. If you would state your name and address for the record, please.
Rory Heggie, 200 Broad Street. So the overview of this is a boutique hotel that is 134 rooms, and from the first 2 floors are mixed use space or hotel amenities, and the second floor also has some conference in it as well. And then as you go up, it is guest room floors for the next 7 floors of the building. And then at the top is a convention or conference ballroom with a rooftop patio bar area. The intent of the design is to blend historic elements, which is the base all the way up to the 7th or up to the 8th floor. And then we step back and provide a modern element, which would have been more of the contemporary addition to the building so that it separates itself from the more brick, stone, and exterior facade that would be more of your traditional design elements. The idea is to also create an inviting pedestrian corridor where people are walking down and there is undulation at the street level. And then when you look up the building as well, you see the undulation continue up there with the cornices and parapets. It has a tie-in of historic elements, blends modern and traditional design, taking elements down from the street, using the idea of the Boise sandstone as well at the base to tie into some of the surrounding buildings. And I think that's pretty much the emphasis of the design that we're going for. Any additional question?
No, thank you. Are there questions for staff or the applicant?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
One quick question. Although not a condition of your approval, we did note that there was a recommendation for you to consider bicycle parking.
Correct.
Is that something that is viable in your project?
So we've had discussions with ownership and we're looking at a multitude ways of parking, both bicycle. They're also looking at doing bicycle storage and bicycle sharing, which they would provide in the building as well. And they're actually looking at a potential of where they can locate the scooters as well as a operational, well, not bicycle, but part of a pretty contemporary way of getting around downtown now, which seems to be there. So we are looking into how those are stored and where we would keep them on property as well.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other
Mr.
questions?
Chairman,
Yes,
is this the right time to bring up my concern with the project?
absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So kudos on, well, both the project, its location, and the historic design. I think it does a very good job of echoing historic brick architecture without trying to pretend that it's something it isn't, which I think is hard to pull off, and this building does. My concern starts at the top of the building. I understand the idea of going for a modern sort of penthouse type look, but I find it confusing that there's a dome at the corner that's, honestly, it looks a little Disney World to me, and I'm not sure what its place is there. Like, it sort of looks like it's trying to look like the Eidenhow, but
So
it doesn't really. And then, sorry, I'm just going to finish my thought. And then the dark modern part looks more contemporary than modern. Like it feels like it needs to contrast further with the historic elements of the building. And I think the reason it isn't doing that is because it has more than one roof line. Okay, I feel like this is done all over Europe with really old buildings, and it seems to work better when it's a perfectly clean modern box put on top of an old building or an old styled building. And this is sort of like almost too contemporary, trying to mix with something that's not quite historic. And then when you put the dome with it, it feels muddled. That's my concern.
So the intent of the dome is that it was part of that traditional building. As you can see on the corner, I'm not sure if the perspectives is part of the presentation are here, but if you look at it on the perspective side, the stone colonnade or the stone that continues up through it actually continues up into the dome. So that was part of it, that it was that older 1950s, 60s mentality, that's actually the part of the building, and that it's accentuated up there as part of what was traditionally built. The two roof lines that we have shown is actually, the first roof line is the floor. what would be the walls of the 8th level with the conference room and everything else. And then the second roof line that's visible in the elevations is actually the screening wall to protect, because of the rooftop units that are up there that are required to be screened. So in the elevation, that's why you're seeing the 2 separate roof planes, is because it actually steps back behind where we have it. And we're trying to reduce that footprint as much as possible so that we do have every rooftop unit closed. But the cupola element is the feature that continues up through the corner. So that would have been built with the building as if it was one of the bell towers or the clock tower from a historical standpoint. And then, the materiality is just, it's the same material for all of it with being there. If it's the materiality on the modern versus contemporary side of it, I think that's something we could work with design review to go back through and see, if it is too dark or too light for where it sits, being a metal panel. So, but that's the intent for the stylistic move, is that the cupola is part of the existing building, and then the modern piece behind it sits there. And as you can see from the street front, it's sort of that hidden gem that sits up there.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
just in response to that, so the materials are not of concern at all. What I'm wondering, and it's difficult to tell from the renderings, although these are quite helpful. Will anybody be able to see the cupola and the more modern roof structure at the same time? Because those seem to work only when you see them separately. They, like the view that I have in front of me now that's looking from the corner, works because you can't see the modern, I don't know what to call it, the modern box. And then the cupola now here makes sense. But if you can see it at the same time as the more modern structure, then that's when they seem to conflict. But it's hard when we look directly sideways at a building. I have no idea if there's any time any pedestrian or anybody would see this view because of the height of the building. Do you know if because of the setback of the rooftop structure, if from a pedestrian view, would you see the modern structure?
From a pedestrian view, you'd have to be pretty far down Grove Street to see both of them in the same visual sense. We do have it's a 25-foot setback from the edge of one side where the cupola would be to the start of the wall for the modern materiality. So it is going to be a significant distance that you would have to see it. And I would believe that you're actually most likely not going to see the wall. You'd probably first see the mechanical screening, if anything, since that's the highest piece of it. And you'd have to be pretty far away from it to see that from a pedestrian standpoint.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better about my previous concerns. Thank you for addressing that.
Thank you.
any other questions for the applicant or staff?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I'd just like clarification on that, the top floor of the historicist sort of style. Is that intended to be the same brick as the bulk of the building? Or is there going to be a material change to sort of accentuate the tripartite structure on that?
The intent's for it all to be the same brick,
Okay.
just to maintain as it goes up.
Thank you. As a matter of personal preference, I would just say that it would probably look better if there were a brick similar in color to that, that nice band that you've got going across there. But I don't think I'm really here to make personal preference calls. Just an observation. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, is there any member of the public that would like to testify on this? Seeing none on that front, I would thank you for giving us your information and close the open part of the hearing and open it up to the committee for debate. Over a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I think the applicant and the design team have done a commendable job on this particular project, and it'll be a nice addition to that particular end of town. And as the downtown, as we've seen here in recent times, we're seeing more development downtown that tends to go vertical, and quite a bit vertical. I suspect that the view corridors to the building will be interrupted by a lot of other things in the foreground before you see it from any great distance, other than on the street itself. So with that said, I would move for approval of DRH 21-00368, subject to the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and the recommended conditions of approval noted in the project report.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Victoria, will you call the roll?
Sabala,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Hrsted.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. The next item to be heard is item number 3, DRH 21-00370. Construction of 5 new single-family detached residences on contiguous substandard lots of record on property in a R3D multifamily residential with design review zone. And with that, I'll turn it over to staff.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Michaela Owens, and I am presenting DRH 20-00370, located at 1016 North 31st Street. So as mentioned, and for a brief project overview, the applicant is proposing to construct new single-family homes on those 5 contiguous substandard lots of record located in the multifamily residential with a design review overlay zone. This was previously approved through PUD 21-20. Just to give you a bit of context, this is located about 1 block southeast of State Street between North 31st Street and West Davis Street. Again, there are those 5 lots there. Previously, it was a single family home and I believe a shop, and now it's being converted to these substandard homes. It is high density land use located in the north and east ends planning area. Just to give you a brief site plan here, the applicants are requesting a reduction in the front setback. Their 2 neighbors have a 25-foot setback, which would require a 20-foot front setback for these lots. The applicants are requesting that it's between 10 and 12 for their front setbacks. Staff has conditioned that the external lots on the north and south are going to have 15-foot front setbacks. Staff is also requiring as a condition a 5-foot wide sidewalk to replace the 4-foot sidewalk that exists there currently. As a side note, the mature trees that are located on site are being retained. Just to give you some elevations here, staff is requiring that there be some structural changes to 2 of the 5 homes there in order to increase architectural diversity. It's a partial 2-story design, but the peak height is only 21 foot and 6 inches. They have a mix of materials, including stucco, woodlap, and stone for their siding, With a color palette of blues, tans, and grays. The garages are just one material there, and it is the woodlap. We have received some public commentary on this. Primarily, the concern is traffic and that the increased density would increase traffic in a few areas. There were also comments regarding the garages which share common walls to have those detached instead of sharing the walls, that the proposed front setbacks were too small at 10 to 12 feet. This was addressed by staff in increasing those external front setbacks to 15 feet. There was also mentioned the possibility of overwhelming the sewer capability. However, sewer, that department did not have any comments to that to, reiterate that. There was a concern that the density was too high and that there should be no more than 2 houses on these 5 lots. With that in mind, staff recommends approval with the included conditions of DRH 21-00370 and approval with the included conditions for the setback waiver. With that, I concede the rest of my time to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the applicant available?
Yes. Oh. Are you there? Hello?
We're having some audio issues, so I'll turn to staff to figure this out.
Omar, do you have more than one device connected to the meeting? You would need to mute all of the others.
Okay. Ron is on a separate device. I'll mute mine. Is that there?
There still seems to be a little echo. Can you mute the speaker on the device? On any secondary device?
Mute yours and we'll try mine. I can't figure out how to get to mine. Okay, give me just a moment. Try that. Talk. Over here. Okay.
Okay, there you go.
All right. Thank you.
Just one thing, if you could give us your name and address for the record before you present.
Go ahead. It's Ronald Roush, and my address is 3310 North Acre Lane in Boise. And I can give you mine if you'd like as well, Mr. Chairman, council members.
Sure, if you're going to present, that would be appreciated.
5730 South Snapdragon Place in Boise, Idaho, 83716.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So we are in agreement with staff recommendations, and we'll move forward with the conditions that they have with the setback waiver and all the conditions that they have specified.
Okay, any other comments?
Not at this time. Ron?
Okay.
Guess not, if you want to talk about the sidewalk.
Are there any questions for the staff or the applicant?
I might have one. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, members of all.
Mr. Roush, question for you. In the staff report, it is indicated that and it's not a condition of approval at this particular time, but it indicated that there will be, they suggested providing a 6-foot tall cedar privacy fence around the perimeter of the site and between the units. That was not indicated on the drawings that we received. Is that your intent?
That is our intent.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
can I ask that staff puts up a map view? I couldn't see from the previous, yes, that the one back, please.
Green fence.
I can't see the different setbacks here. Should they be, oh, I see. How many feet different are the ones on the end from the three in the center?
15 feet in the sides, and the centers are
10 and 12.
10 and 12.
Yeah, as requested by staff. It doesn't show it on
Okay.
these plans, but on our designer has adjusted those, but we were unable to get them to this meeting. But when we submit for plan, it will have the 15-foot setbacks on the exteriors and then the 10 and 12s on the interiors.
Thank you. Sorry, I meant to address that to our staff.
One,
Oh, sorry about that.
That's all right. Thank you.
Yeah, the applicant is correct in that. They did provide updated plans to me that weren't presented here because they were a bit after the cutoff for this hearing. However, they have already adjusted those to be 15 feet for those external properties. The intent of that 15-foot was to be more in line with the surrounding neighborhood. As you can see here, some of the surrounding single-family homes have about a 20-foot setback, and code does require that it's within 15 feet of those, or it's within 5 feet, sorry, of those setbacks. So increasing it to 15 would create more regularity. So that was the purpose of that condition.
Thank you.
Mr. Rush, I do have a question since the question came up about the mass of the garage in the back. Instead of articulating it with multiple structures, you've done it with one structure. Would you just kind of address that and let us know your thinking on that?
you want to comment on it?
Sure. Is that for us or for staff?
No, that's
For
for
you.
you.
Okay, yes. Utilizing the space that we're given on these substandard lots and maximizing the garages is very important to us. We have done some substandard construction over near the university, and we did join the garages with common wall and with fire protection, and we just need that extra space for parking. These lots are challenging to build on.
It makes a lot of difference in the width of the garages that you can do. And so it makes it where you're tight turning in from the alley a little bit, it makes it a little easier to turn a car in because you've got a little wider garage and be able to get out of the vehicle to in and out of the vehicle.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman,
Excuse me?
sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I think the attached or the one building for the garages is a great solution for these narrow lots. And you know, unless we become a city where people don't drive cars, we're going to have to figure out creative solutions like this. And this is a very good one. I do have a question, and again, it's for staff. I'm concerned about the design of the second story of these houses. And I'm wondering if it's because of our code that it ended up looking like. So to me, I hope this is not just a personal preference, but I see that the style the architect's going for is cottage, and the bump outs on the second floor make it look like modified cottage that had a weird addition because someone needed to bump out the attic. I'm just wondering if there's a reason that it's not, a single roof line, which would be a lot more consistent with, cottage type blocks. And I have no, I think it's fine that we've asked the applicant to vary the design styles. I have no problem if they were all exactly the same and just different colors. I think some uniformity can look really good when it's only 5 houses on a block, especially when they're small. But it's those second story bump outs that I just don't think they're neither here nor there style wise, and then they present more facade without fenestration. So is that something? Is it because our code required the architects to try to work around having a true 2-story home because of the substandard lot? Is that why this happened, or is this happened just because somebody likes this design?
Mr. Chair, committee
Yes, Steph.
members. So yes, more than likely that design did stem from the substandard lot ordinance. It is pretty restrictive, and to maximize your size, it is difficult to do so without providing those bump outs there. So they are proposing a partial 2-story style. A full 2-story likely would not have been approved. So the partial 2-story was probably the most that they could fit onto the site in order to accommodate as much space as possible. That being said, in my report, I also suggest that, a single story or a 1.5 story is the preferred height. The partial 2-story makes sense here because on the surrounding properties, I'll pull that up real quick. On the surrounding properties, internal to them is usually a garage or a shop type structure. So the partial 2-story made sense in this instance because it wouldn't be looking right into someone's house, which is why I said it wouldn't have adverse effects on the surrounding properties. So I believe they are proposing that partial 2-story just to maximize the amount of space that the owners would have. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I would just like to suggest that internally that we take a look at the ordinance and see if there isn't a better solution for substandard lots in the future.
I'll take note of that for our staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant or staff?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
one question for staff. In looking at the adjusted setbacks on the end-to-end units, when you apply the additional square footage to the front, you take it from the back private area. That reduces that back private area from the 375 square feet required in ordinance to 300 square feet. Is that a problem?
Yes. So committee.
Yes.
So yes, they would need to reduce the size of the structure itself by those few feet that we're missing. So those 3 feet, usually in this instance, it appears, in order to accommodate the open space that they require. So they wouldn't be able to just push it back. They would have to cut off a few feet there because otherwise they won't meet their minimum 375 square feet of open space in the rear.
Okay, so is that an accommodation we'll make for the additional square footage or the additional setback on the front? Is what you believe is okay? We can do that?
Committee members, yeah, I think that would be the best course of action. We'll probably have to speak with the applicants to ensure that that will work for their design, but that was the intent of the condition, would be that we would reduce the size of the structure slightly rather than pushing it back.
Yeah, 12 feet wide gets to be a little cozy, but you've got 25 foot in length. So I guess you have a bocce court or something there. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Sorry, I know this is difficult to resume. Can I suggest that instead of doing that we ask that the setbacks remain consistent. I understand the staff suggestion and why the end units have been asked to increase their setbacks, but I think it's going to look really funny to have 5 houses that read as a unit or a development or a neighborhood. And, you know, they won't, maybe they'll relate better to the houses adjacent, but they won't relate as well to each other if they're not in a straight line. And I think these houses not being in a straight line will just be more detrimental than not having them lined up with the existing houses. It seems a little wonky, you know, unless they had something like a porch that lined up. But I think it's going to look like a mistake if 2 of the houses out of 5 that are all built at the same time and, you know, are clearly one development, if 2 of the 5 aren't lined up.
Mr. Chair.
Was that a question? Did you have a question for staff about that, Dana?
I did, and I guess it's a question and a request to take a look at that. And yeah, I'd like to understand if it's possible to move them all up a little bit.
Okay, I'll let staff respond to that.
Mr. Chair, committee members. So there are quite a few tenets of the substandard lot ordinance, which are purposefully included to decrease how developments have a presence on the street. So varying the setback, varying the architectural diversity, those are all inclusions in the substandard lot ordinance to reduce essentially the presence that a development like this, when it is built on these smaller substandard lots, would have on the street. So that is included. So if that's something you would like to look at in the substandard lot ordinance, I believe that would need addressed more than likely before applying it to any projects. But again, this is your discretion to decide what would be an appropriate setback for these structures.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, if I might, I'm curious what other committee members think about that, about varying the setbacks of these 5 homes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, member.
I would like to just point out, and I think it's kind of difficult to read on this site plan. The center house is already a varied setback. I believe that's the one that's set 12 feet back. The 2 that flank that are 10 feet back. And then the additional 5 feet. So the 15-foot setback is on the furthest north and south house. So there already is a variety of setbacks called out. It's not 2 that are set back on either end and then 3 aligned in the middle. And I think that the substandard housing ordinance is well thought out in that regard. I think that having that sort of implied organic feel to it, where, you know, they aren't all the exact same lot and building set in there, do help to integrate that into whatever existing neighborhood is being used as the site. I had a couple of additional questions, and I'm not entirely sure to whom I should direct those. The backyard area on the northern and southern houses, does that itself have to be the outdoor space provided, or can that space include the side yard?
Mr. Chair, committee member
Yes.
Erstad. So I don't believe that it has to be in the rear yard, and it can include required setbacks for the space, but it does have some minimum dimensional requirements that we have to meet.
Okay. Then to sort of piggyback off of that, there is a condition of approval called out here. It is 1D. that requires structural differences that increase the architectural diversity on 2 of the 5 units. Given that there is a street facing inclusion there, I would say that the structural differences in those 2 houses, because of that minimum dimension in the rear, do not account, they do not qualify as meeting the requirements of 1D.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just to clarify your question. So
Sorry.
no worries. Those are 2 different concerns, I believe. So the structural difference would have to do with the elevations themselves. We just want to see architecturally that the difference between them changes a bit. So it'd be that 31st Street
Right.
would be where we would be looking for those architectural differences. And then the other issue is more of the setback issue into the open space.
Okay, no, that answers
Does
my
that make
question
sense? Okay.
perfectly. Yes, thank you. And then to continue on this one, the elevations that are shown on 31st Street are essentially, it's economical. It's the same design mirrored and a couple of different materials packages applied. I would just like to clarify, are there any requirements that certain material packages be diversified in those structural changes? Like, so for instance, 1014 and 1008 can't be both the same structural alterations, right? So that it's the same material package that gets altered at the same time. It would be, a kind of mix and match, have the alterations on 2 of them and have them also get different material callouts.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So those would be 2 different issues, I believe. So what I called for in the condition was that there be architectural changes. And just in speaking with the rest of the DR team, we decided that to change 2 of them would make the most sense, especially because they do use similar packaging. So it's 2 different units essentially that they're repeating the styles. So it would make more sense to just change that one style, just to simplify it for builders and developers. There is some conditions within the substandard law ordinance that talk about material diversity, again, to reduce how its presence is on the street. They don't necessarily have to create units like this where they repeat the same styles in architecture and building materials. So it's really up to them how they want to make that work for them within the constraints of the substandard law ordinance. Did that answer your question?
Essentially,
Okay.
yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for the staff or the applicant? Seeing none, I'll close the open part of the meeting and move into discussion. Yes.
Mr. Chair, we'll want to look for public comment.
Yes, I apologize for that. Are there any members of the public who would like to testify on this?
Oh, that's good. We're not gonna do that.
And would the applicant like to say anything with regard to the items that have been brought up?
I'm sorry, we were muted from that last 30, 45 seconds. Was there a public comment that was there?
No, there's no public comments.
Oh, okay.
At this point, I'm just asking if you have any other comments with regard to things that have been brought up.
The comments that I have are that the designs that we did over on Longmont Street by the university, they were very well received, and they were a new introduction to this new code. And the city has been great to guide us, and I think together we're going to put a product on the market that is compatible with the neighborhood And we're excited to get started.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments, questions? This time seeing none, I'll close the open part of the meeting and move to discussion or a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I think the one thing that I would like to see would be an addition of material differentiation on the alley facing facade of the garage, just to break up that facade and also to increase legibility for users understanding which garage belongs to which house. I don't know if that's an overreach or is that within our purview?
I would ask staff, I would think it's certainly within our purview.
Sorry, I thought that you were closing my
No.
portion to comment. Okay. Yeah, given that Josh agrees that that would be appropriate, that does have to do with the design of the structure in general. It's not required by the substandard law ordinance, but definitely within your purview.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Member Zuckerberg.
I'm going to have to disagree with my fellow committee member. I like that it reads as one building. I think it just makes it a lot cleaner, especially given the fact that it's a garage. And I don't think it should garner much attention, and like that it's sort of a, lower slung, simpler building, and yeah, and would like to leave it alone. My concern is really the bump outs, but that appears to be something that I'm going to have to somehow figure out how we work with our guidelines to fix so we don't get too much of this. And I just have to say it's more of a zoning issue than a design issue, but I really like infill projects like this. And I think that they look especially good when they read as one project. It doesn't look like a cookie cutter subdivision, but it looks like, someone came in, took an empty or derelict lot and added good housing stock for Boise. And so I have no problem with uniformity of any kind when it comes to, especially because the houses are so small and so close to each other. I think it looks neater, cleaner, and more neighborly when they're similar in style instead of being all over the place.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would agree with Commissioner Zuckerman's comments on the garages. I think they're, I don't have a problem with that. I think it would be easy enough for the owners to figure out which unit belongs there to themselves. And I think as the project progresses and has final reviews with the applicant and staff in terms of the front elevations, I think there's whatever structural changes, architectural changes they can do on the two units, and then working with their palette of materials and colors, I think they can do an admirable job of trying to get some uniqueness to each unit on each site. And that goes along, I think, with the, as I recall, in the landscaping portion of this, there's a fair amount of landscaping in terms of trees and shrubs and that could be also used, and instead of replicating the same layout house to house, they could adjust those as they go through. So each house has a sort of a unique identity in terms not only of the architecture, but of the site development. So with that, I would move for approval of DRH 21-00370, subject to the findings of fact and the conclusions of law and conditions, site-specific conditions in the staff report, with the addition of item I, which would be that the applicant will provide a 6-foot-high cedar privacy fence around the perimeter of the site and between each lot in compliance with Boise City requirements.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Victoria will call the roll.
Sabala,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Ersted.
Aye.
All in favor, motion carries.
The final item for us to hear this evening is DRH 21-00372 at 709 North Cole Road, construct a new 5-story multifamily building with 61 units and associated site improvements on a property in a C1D DA zone. I'll turn it over to staff.
Mr. Chair, committee members. Again, Michaela Owens presenting DRH 20-00372 located at 709 North Cole Road. Just as a brief project overview, this is an application to construct a new 61-unit multifamily building with a height and parking exception previously approved through a PUD process on 1.64 acres in a neighborhood commercial zone with design review overlay and a development agreement. Just for a bit of development context here, this is located within the West Bench planning area. It's located to the south of West Emerald Street and to the west of North Cole Road. In addition, a specific site concern would be that the Reidenbach Canal is located along that diagonal rear property line. To show you the site plan here, the access is going to come off an existing point off of Cole Road. There are 57 spaces required by code, parking spaces for this development. 54 are proposed. As you can see, the site is somewhat constrained given the Reidenbach Canal easement. There are some parking spaces located on the northwest corner that staff is requiring to be relocated as they encroach that easement there. And they also would require, if a larger car than a compact one parked in them, then it would have the rear of that car in the drive aisle. So staff is requesting that that be relocated to that 6-space compact parking area located to the south of the building. It would encroach on those landscape planters a bit, but the terminal planters in the northwest corner, that parking space would be turned into landscaping. In addition, there is some bicycle parking provided on site, which is appropriate and meets all code requirements. Moving on to landscaping. The landscaping is fairly adequate for the site. Again, it is constrained due to the site's layout. In some areas, terminal planters are not the full 8 feet wide in order to accommodate the drive aisle and the required parking, but applicant has been willing to increase landscaping wherever possible in order to reduce that heat island effect there. Again, that northwest parking will be replaced by a landscape planter. The number of trees provided and the mix of species is appropriate according to the design guidelines for this property. Moving on to our elevations and renderings here, there is an appropriate mix of materials provided. Primarily, the siding material is stucco in a few different colors. There's also some fiber cement designed to look like wood and metal siding. The condition that we would be discussing today is that the design guidelines require 2 feet of metal banding above grade when metal siding or stucco is adjacent to a pedestrian pathway or vehicular pathway, which does occur in a couple of places on this site. As you can see, there is some roofline modulation that's proposed as well as vertical modulation, which helps break up the massing of this multifamily building. With that, staff recommends approval with conditions of DRH 21-372 and cedes the rest of my time to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the applicant available to testify? Please state your name and address for the record.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, Eric Anderson, 119 East State Street, Suite 120. Michaela, thanks for your presentation. And we've gone through the staff report and we've worked close with Michaela to kind of address some of these issues before we got here tonight. We've already reworked the site plan. We had an issue regarding the parking, we've already provided a new site plan relocating those 2 parking stalls, replacing them with landscaping. The one condition regarding metal siding, we didn't know we couldn't quite do that. We've done other projects, so and we've seen around town like, well, that looked good, but we've discussed this and we'd like to replace that with we'll go with a cement or concrete wainscot up to 2 to 3 feet, and we'll remove the metal siding from the project to make sure we all adhere. Other than that, we've worked really hard to make sure we make this a nice development. We put a lot of bicycle parking in. We've worked closely with the neighbors to address their traffic concerns and the speed that we've changed that drive aisle to go around and zigzag through the development. So people going through the development can't go straight shot into the commercial development. It slows them down. We've tried to modulate, really work with the materials within the area and the modulation and the colors of the surrounding developments. And other than that, I stand for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for the applicant or staff?
Mr.
Yes.
Mr. Anderson, the only question I had was in the staff report under parking, it indicates that the required number of bicycle parking spaces is 61, and it indicates that you're providing 37.
No, that's been updated. We do have 61 on site.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
may I clarify something?
sure.
So the condition that I referenced that has to do with the 2 feet of banding would be what the committee could discuss adding to that staff report today, just as a point of clarification.
Thank you very much. Noted.
And like I mentioned, we'd replace that with concrete.
Thank
Go
you.
up to 2 feet. Okay.
Would you, sorry, Mr.
Yes,
Chair,
yes.
to clarify, would you be replacing the entire metal?
The metal's gone off the project. We
Okay.
will take that off. And we'll replace that with a 2-foot concrete stem wall and let the stucco come right down to it. So.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
Are there any members of the public that would like to testify on this? Seeing none, I will close the open part of the meeting and move it for discussion with the staff or with the committee.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I'm really impressed that the architect was able to fit all of that on a very difficult site. And I'm excited to see that that will be an activated area with more residents. And, previously I probably would have laughed at the requirement of that much bicycle parking because that area is not very bicycle friendly, but perhaps with the addition of, new residents and people who do have access to bicycle parking, maybe it will become more cycle friendly. But I think it's a very well done project, both architecturally and with the way that with the traffic flow through the parking lot. And yeah, I think winding around was a great way to slow down traffic and make sure that it's not an encumbrance to the neighborhood. So congratulations.
any other questions? Absent that, I'd take a motion. And just to clarify, are you suggesting that we need to add that as one of the conditions as part of this motion?
Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. That is what we would be suggesting to comply with the design guidelines.
Okay, thank you. Ready for a motion?
Yeah, you're looking at me like.
You got it.
I don't want to hog the whole piece here, but Anyway, Mr. Chairman, I would move for approval of DRH 21-00327, subject to the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and recommended conditions of approval, with the addition of item 1D. And staff, correct me if I get this out of sequence here, that the metals remove, that the applicant will remove the metal siding from the exterior package at the foundation level and replace with a concrete material in compliance with the Boise City design guidelines.
Second,
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, Victoria, we call a roll.
Sabala,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Armstead,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
With that, our meeting is over and adjourned.